Tz'lof'chad's daughters and societal change. Matthew Berkowitz of the Jewish Theological Seminary reminds us of something. He is in charge of the Israel program. He reminds us that Rashi, the great commentator, sings the praises of these daughters of Tz'lof'chad in remarking that, quote, their eyes saw what Moses' eyes did not see. Because Moshe Rabbeinu had not yet made provision for families in which there were no sons to inherit. But the women saw that. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't see that. And we're going to be talking a lot this morning about the problem of people's eyes not seeing something, and then the virtue of people seeing something that others miss. Moshe complains later. This is at the end of the Varim and Pasha Nitzavim. Moshe says to the children of Israel, but to this day, Hashem has not given you a heart to understand, or eyes to see, or ears to hear. And he laments that because we miss both to see and hear and understand, and therefore will be to reach a deep understanding that good things happen when we have hearts to know, eyes to see, and ears to hear. That's our goal today. In every culture, some things are in focus and other things are out of focus. Every culture is different. And you can learn a lot from other cultures because they notice things you don't. In Torah culture, family structures, clan and tribal identity, and inheritance rights were in focus. One's identity, we're raised in an individualistic society where we assume, without even thinking about it, that the basic integer of reality and of beingness is the individual. We get this from the Enlightenment, from Rene Descartes, who was trying to find what's the basis of knowledge. And he said, well, one thing I know that I'm thinking. So I think, therefore I am, and everything follows from that. So the idea was that the individual was the location of livingness and beingness and of desirable reality. The Bible disagrees. It's interesting detail in 2 Kings when Elisha comes to the Shunammite woman, who is a wealthy woman who shows him conspicuous hospitality. He says, what can I do for you? I mean, you've been so kind to me. What can I do for you? And she answers, I dwell among my own people. That was the biblical view of the good life. It was collective. It was dwelling amongst one's own people. In Israelite society, in the Torah, this sense of being part of a family, part of a clan, part of a tribe, part of a people, that was where existence was. This is why it was a great punishment to be cut off from your people. That doesn't mean that you're physically dead. It means you're socially dead. If you're cut off from your people, you're nobody and you have no existence. And it was the ultimate doom. Such matters of family structures and of inheritance were normally the responsibility of men. Men had the role of being caretakers of the rest of society, and taking care of their women, of their wives, their sisters, were all to be protected and provided for, and men had that responsibility. But the inheritance rights of women never came up. They just didn't see it. It may surprise you to know this, but they just didn't think of it. So it was way out of focus. We get used to not seeing things. I'm going to show you a little more about that. But this is a very important thought. Now, you may not think this is a problem, but that's because there are things you don't see. And you don't know that you don't see them because you don't see them. But we get used to not seeing things. And we need for God to give us eyes to see what we miss, to see the people and the concerns that we marginalize. We push them to the periphery. We don't care about them. We don't want to deal with them. We don't want to see them or hear from them. We need eyes from God and ears to see to hear and see what we ignore and what we wrongly dispute. Let's even forget about disputing them. We don't even see them. We don't notice them. We focus on something else, and those things are off our radar screen. Let's see how this touches history in a moment. The daughters of Tz'lof'chad do a great job of advocating for something they see, which the whole people of Israel did not. Something that was in focus for them, but other people didn't even think of it. They came courageously. They came through proper channels. They came credibly and respectfully also. They come and they draw near. They draw near to, you'll see here, then the daughters of Tz'lof'chad approached. They stood in front of Moshe, Eleazar the Kohen, and the leaders and the whole community at the entrance to the tent of meeting. They came respectfully, and they came through proper channels. But look at the continuation over here. They came credibly because it's interesting that when they introduce themselves, they tell Moshe Rabbeinu, and they tell Eleazar the Kohen, and they tell the leaders, our father died in the desert. He wasn't part of the group who assembled themselves to rebel against Adonai and Korach's group. That's a great detail they're giving. Aristotle would say that they were establishing their ethos, they were establishing their credibility, themselves as sympathetic figures, because they said, look, we come from a loyal family. So for heroes, they give a tremendous lesson in communication, these 5 women. They won their case. We read, Adonai answered Moshe, the daughters of Tz'lof'chad are right in what they say. I would never say, God did not even think of it. I would never say it that way. But it's an amazing passage here. He says, the daughters of Tz'lof'chad are right in what they say. You must give them property to be inherited along with that of their father's brothers. Have what their father would have inherited pass to them. Since they have no brothers, it needs to pass to them. Moreover, say to the people of Israel, and then he goes on and he draws implications, more case law, where he says, and for this group of people, make sure this happens. If that doesn't work, make sure this happens. It opens up a whole avenue of broader righteousness in the community, because these women had eyes to see something that other people didn't see. And we live with this reality in history. And we want to look at what happens when we don't have eyes to see, and then we do. Here's some cases in point. The Constitution of the United States was ratified on June 21st, 1778. We hold these things to be self-evident. This is what we see. We hold these things to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Not exactly. There were certain things that were out of focus that were seen, and it took over 100 years. The 19th Amendment of the Constitution, this August 26th, will be the 103rd anniversary of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. Ninth Amendment stated, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. It was in 1920, August 26th, 1920, that the 19th Amendment was ratified. That was 132 years after the Constitution was signed. For women were treated like part of the all men, which we think would be all people, but it was almost, they didn't really quite mean all masculine people are created equal. They meant all humankind, but they didn't treat women like fully humankind. And we'll see another group that didn't treat like fully humankind. It took 132 years for them to be forced to see it and deal with it. Today's goal, men, is to find out that good things happen when we have hearts to know, eyes to see, and ears to hear. That was one of the good things that happened. Women's suffrage. And women demonstrated for that. You see in the this is a demonstration. We think that street demonstrations started in the 60s. Equality for women, votes for women. Give us the vote now. They saw it was an issue of equality, and they were right. What about the Civil Rights Act of 1960? There's Lyndon B. Johnson, that, and the Honorable and well deserving of respect, Dr. Martin Luther King. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was signed into law by President Lyndon Johnson on June 2nd, 1964. The act prohibited discrimination in public places, provided for the integration of schools and other public facilities, and made employment discrimination illegal based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. But it took 176 years after the ratification of the Constitution for people to be forced to see that. You can understand the civil rights movement in a way. Well, we're going to get to that. This is part of the civil rights movement, but there's another step we're going to look at. You can understand that movement as being a movement that wanted to force America to deal with something they didn't deal with, to see something they were habituated in not seeing, that we were habituated in not seeing. So this is for equality in schools. I remember Orville Forbes. I'm old enough to remember when this was current events. Orville Forbes and the school in Arkansas and the desegregation of that school, integrated schools, other public facilities. Employment discrimination is illegal based on race, color, or religion, or national origin. 176 years. Remember, we're here to see that good things happen when we have hearts to know, eyes to see, and ears to hear. That good thing took 176 years. There's one more good thing. The Voting Rights Act of 1965. This is the one that followed on Lyndon B. Johnson making a speech to Congress that made Martin Luther King cry. He made a speech about this act, and it almost makes me cry. Because Lyndon Johnson was a good old boy from the South. He was normally considered to be a hero of the Democrat the Democrat segregationists of the South. But finished the speech by saying, "We shall overcome." It almost makes me cry. It was an extraordinary moment. And King wept. Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 prohibited voting practices or procedures that discriminate on the basis of race, color, or membership of a minority group. applied across the nation. So first of all, no differentiation in voting practices. Everybody gets to vote on the same basis and to go to the polls on the same basis. Section 5 applied only to jurisdictions, including some entire states with a history of discriminatory voting practices. That was in the South, where sometimes you had to have property, you had to be a landowner to vote. That was just to exclude Black people, period. You had to pass certain literacy requirements and other things. It was just nonsense. It was hurdles to diminish the Black vote. Section 5 applied only to jurisdictions in some entire states with a history of these practices. It required those areas to pre-clear their laws with the Department of Justice Federal Court. In other words, they couldn't simply institute these hurdles. They had to get an okay from the federal court or the Department of Justice, which they were not going to get. But it took 177 years for Black people to be considered part of that all people who are created equal. Just as 132 years for women to be part of that all men are created equal. So what we're trying to learn here is that good things happen. And we have hearts to know, eyes to see, and ears to hear. If you want to advocate like this, you need to learn from the daughters of Tz'lof'chad. You need to come. There's going to be times in your life, God willing, when you see something in terms of justice that other people prefer not to see, or they don't see, or they don't look at. We have a responsibility for God to seek justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. Seek justice. Advocate. You know, I'm feeling a grief at this time in my life because 50 years ago, I remember when I was teaching school, I was in my 20s. This was the era of the civil rights movement, even before that, and the Dr. Martin Luther King's March on Washington. People cared enough about things to march. They cared enough to fill the streets. They cared enough to assemble. I don't know how many people were there on the Washington Mall, but they came. They came just because they heard about it. I mean, talk about motivation. Nowadays, people just continue looking at their iPads and their computer screens and their cell phones. People, there are things going on in our country that deserve the people in the streets demonstrating, and we don't see it. If you see something, there's an issue. Come courageously. Come as a group too. Come through channels. They went through channels respectfully. Dr. Martin Luther King was an amazing man, respectful, nonviolent. Who could imagine that through the nonviolent movement on the part of people that were rendered powerless, that everything would be overturned? Come credibly. You have to have some credibility and keep coming. Now, here is something. This is a man, Victor Blackwell. I just stumbled across this on YouTube where I roam around a lot. He's a reporter for CNN. And we're going to listen to a video, a short video of something in his family that is a perfect illustration of the daughters of Tz'lof'chad. So let's listen to this. Let's see if I can make this happen. For me, baby. For me. Okay. All right, just getting this to you. This is a promise. Hold on. right. Very victim. Um, let's try it this way. There it is. Okay, it's coming up.
There is a new museum in
Okay, just 1 second. I'm going to share this screen. Here it is. Now, this is powerful. It made me cry. It'll make you cry. It's glorious. Rusty may know it's loud enough.
South Carolina, dedicated to hundreds of years of African American history. It's Black history in global context and through individual stories too. Now, to show off the expanse and resonance of the museum's Center for Family History, researchers traced my genealogy. Now listen, as a Black man with deep roots in the American South, I thought I knew where my story was headed. I was very wrong. Very few moments in my career have ever brought me to this. This is, oh, man. It happened at the International African American Museum in Charleston, South Carolina, which opens this month. 6 centuries of history packed into 150,000 square feet at the historic Gadsden's Wharf.
Above 40% of all enslaved Africans would have come in through Gadsden's Wharf. We've been referred to as the ground zero of importation of enslaved people in the United States.
Don Matthews is the museum's president and CEO. Space of solemnity or celebration?
Yes. I refuse to choose.
Tribal art and contemporary fashion, relics of protest and reports of resistance.
It's this infusion of trauma and joy constantly that we like to talk about here. You get the full story, but you're going to get all the context in it.
What arguably is the best illustration of full context is Museum Center for Family History. It's a team of researchers with access to millions of records that can trace African American lineage, sometimes back to a slave ship that came into this very port. The expert genealogist here spent months tracing my lineage. And this was the day of the long-awaited reveal.
Make sure you got a box of Kleenex by you and sit there and enjoy.
That's the museum's top genealogist, Dr. Shelley Murphy, on the laptop, joining us from the University of Virginia.
This is a tree, just a snapshot of your tree, and I'm maternal line.
That's a lot seeing the tree. You see that box? Well, that's my great-great-great-grandfather. Richmond County, Virginia, on a farm. His wife Judy and their 18 reimbursed for livestock and supplies requisitioned by Union troops during the Civil War.
Another thing that is significant is that he owned the land that he's on, and it was 23 acres.
Where did a man in the 1870s, so soon after the end of slavery, get the money to buy 23?
Thing of it is, I would even question, he said he was freeborn.
Well, for some answers, we have to go back more than 300 years to my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, Mary. She arrived on a ship in Northumberland County, Virginia in 1712, before America was America. Her granddaughter, my 8 times great-grandmother, Bess, was with her. That's according to this centuries-old deposition that Dr. Murphy's team uncovered. Why a deposition? We'll learn that a little later.
And Bess at the time was about 13 years old. Witnesses apparently said they looked like they were Indians.
Researchers believe that Mary and Bess were actually Matabani, like these people of that region of Virginia called the Northern Neck.
We're not sure where they came from, but Thomas Smith of Richmond County did enslave one of Bess's children, and that was Sarah.
And it's Sarah, my 7 times great-grandmother, who changes the trajectory of her children and all her descendants who followed.
There was a law back in 1705 that declared that all children that are enslaved or free, their condition would be based on whatever their mother was.
Remember, Sarah and Bess arrived free people.
So Sarah has a lawsuit that's filed saying we're free.
This is the actual lawsuit filed by Sarah, suing for her freedom and for the freedom of her descendants. And that deposition, it was from a witness who saw Mary and Bess arrive decades earlier.
So in 1791, the court agreed with Sarah and her children, the grandchildren, and all of those relatives who were descendants of Mary and Bess are going to be free.
That my ancestors filed and sued for their freedom. It is remarkable.
We're not done.
We're not done. We're not done. Okay. We're not done. Let me get a Kleenex, Doctor.
I told you to have a box there.
Not all of Sarah's family was free. Before the court's decision, Sarah's enslavers illegally sold her daughter, Rachel, and then Rachel was sold again. And for the next 20 years, unaware of the court's ruling, Rachel and her children remained in bondage. When she learned of the decision in 1807, more than a quarter century after her mother's groundbreaking lawsuit for freedom, Rachel filed this lawsuit against her enslaver, claiming that she was the daughter of a free woman, and therefore she and her children should also be free.
And guess what? The witnesses and things all came through, and they were awarded their freedom. So, what do you think?
This is, oh, man. To be an enslaved woman, suing a slave master, to do it twice in one bloodline
And
is
Virginia,
remarkable.
your line enslaved became free to a victor in your family. It's unbelievable.
It fills in a lot of gray, a lot of blank space. There was nothing there. There was an assumption. Now there are names, relatives, and places and stories. It certainly fills in more of the story of my family's place in this country.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, I got nothing to say. That says it, man. We're gonna break up into groups now, and I've relayed some questions to Rusty for us to discuss in these various groups. They grow out of the experience we just had. So I hope that you'll find it